Live from the studio at the Northwest Florida School of Biblical Studies, this is Have a Bible Question, where you are part of the program. Now, let's go to the Bible for answers to your Bible questions.
Now, with that being said, that's a natural segue to Sabus's question. Now, he did a great job setting the stage for us. He says, some brethren are saying we don't need to congregate at the church building so we can worship God in our home. The problem or excuse is not the distance in between, because everything in here, and how do I say that? Itarema? Is that?
Yeah, Itarema.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I said.
That's what you said.
It is near. Of course, doing this every Sunday, they can't have a communion with the brotherhood. Nowadays, I'm developing a study about this because I believe we really do need to have a sincere communion with every brother. With regard to the Bible, what would you answer for this kind of dilemma? And I think that's a great question. And in fact, we've discussed this some on the program, because we're seeing a lot of people today say, well, if I can stay online and worship, then I don't need to be able to come together. We don't have to have the true assembly. And there's so many ways we can approach this, Troy. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to give you a little bit of context there. This is fascinating. Yeah, as you said, we have discussed this on the program of what we're dealing with here in the United States. Sabus Garcia is writing from Brazil. That town, Itarema, that's in Brazil. So isn't this interesting that they're having struggles in the church in a different continent?
Yeah. I mean, that's just one of those amazing things when we start looking to it. Really there's nothing new under the sun. And we get a problem going here, and then oftentimes it's somewhere else. So let's start this by answering several things here. But Troy, toss it, because I'm going to toss it to you. I'm trying to find a verse I want. There's a great point. You're gonna love it when I bring it up, but I can't find it.
Well, Sabus, you're on the right track there. You're exactly right. There's a difference in logging in and watching worship on television. Now, we will say this: what happens? We were in a unique situation with COVID, and we didn't really know what to do. And there's a lot of questions. We've learned a lot since then. And so we have talked about this before, Guyton and myself and several others. There's nothing wrong with the live stream as far as any kind of biblical aspect, because it's no different than if we were receiving a letter from Paul or one of the apostles or something, because it's teaching. And so you're getting spiritual nourishment. You're learning from that live stream. But that's it. That's as far as it goes, because God designed worship. He designed the assembly for a very specific purpose. And as John chapter 4, verse 24 says, that God is spirit. We must worship him in spirit and truth. Well, the spirit is being the right attitude. We got to come with the right attitude, and we've got to present ourselves and submit to God. And truth means we do it according to the scriptures, according to the right doctrine. Well, what is that doctrine? The doctrine you see, for example, in Acts chapter 20, verse 7, which says that they came together on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, and Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. Now, the key words there is they came together. There is a common communion that takes place, and that can only happen in person. There is no way that you can get that spread across different distances and things like that and call that a corporate common union or communion worship. All right.
And I've got another one that I'm going to throw at you, Troy.
Great.
And that is Paul's admonitions that we see given to Timothy, like in 1 Timothy chapter 6, and I am in verse 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 2.
4.
Verse 2.
Okay.
These things teach and exhort. That's the same word we actually have in Second Timothy. And when we go to chapter 4 and verse 2, when it says, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort. Now, the word is parakaleo, which is the idea of ask for earnestly, to invite, to encourage, but also is the idea to call together. And that's used like in Acts chapter 28, verse 20, Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 22. And it's really interesting because what you actually have in these passages is the idea, and I meant to find one other that I saw, but it's the idea that, Ray, you may help me with this, where he sends Tychicus because what he wants to be able to do is, I can send a letter to you. And that may be the Ephesians 6 verse 22, if I'm right, but, I can send a letter to you, but that's not the same as someone coming to exhort you. Exhortation is something that happens when people come together to be encouraged and invited. And that's right. That's the word parakaleo. So we cannot fulfill the command to exhort when we don't have a coming together. And I think that's also to throw in here Hebrews 10 and the idea of not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is. Remember verse 24, considering one another, provoking one another. Verse 24, let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. And when people sit at home and don't assemble with the brethren, they're not considering one another. They're just considering themselves right there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And can we throw in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 on this?
Oh, yes.
1 Corinthians chapter 14 is full of various verses. For example, in 14 verse 23, he says, and this is New King James, therefore, if the whole church comes together in one place. Now, of course, he goes on to talk about some problems that they're having there with miraculous speaking in tongues and stuff like that. But then again, he says it in verse 26. How is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, and so forth, as a tongue and revelation. Again, he's talking about these miraculous things, but he's talking about worship. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 is talking about worship. Now, here's the key verse that I want to take you to, and that's verse 40 that we quote all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Let all things be done decently and in order. That's impossible to do whenever you're trying to assemble in distances via Zoom, via a live stream or something like that. You see, this is instruction about worship. And he says over and over, when you come together, if you come together, let it be done decently and in order. That's a command. And so I think we can imply or infer from that it is a gathering that must take place.
By the words themselves, we can prove this, that it's a gathering and assembling, whether we're talking about from ecclesia or we're talking about parakaleo. The words are specific, just like the word baptizo is specific. So are these words about coming together. And we also have the reciprocating relationship that happens among the congregation, provoking one another unto love and good works, speaking to yourselves in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, Colossians 3:16, Ephesians 5:19.
Great point.
There is a relationship, reciprocating relationship that if you can't do anything else, because you just cannot get out for any reason. And so you decide to use a live stream lesson to help you study God's word. That's fine. But don't be mistaken and think that you have fulfilled these commands by watching something on television or on the computer.
Great point. Great point. Paul also says there, going back to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, I noticed something in that verse 26. He says, let me get to it here again. He says, how is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation. Now, I mentioned already that there's some other things going on there with the miraculous. However, the last part of that verse, let all things be done for edification. How are you going to be edified? How are you going to, you mentioned this. This was a key point you brought out last time we talked about this, guy, and is there's that reciprocity that takes place.
Mm-hmm.
A key element in worship, that it's reciprocal. Whenever I am in a group of people and we're singing, which by the way, I'd be happy to talk about that. And speaking of all this COVID stuff, but when we're singing, I'm hearing you sing, you're hearing me sing. We are singing. We all sing to God, right? And it's all about God. It's about coming together to worship Him.
It's kind of interesting. I thought about this the other day because I was watching something where they have pretty much created a fake worship. It's not happening live. They created this fake worship so that you could sit there and watch it and participate. And I was thinking, these same people that are putting these songs up, how's that different than what they oppose about the choir getting up there and singing for you?
Oh man, you're stepping on my toes now a little bit there.
well, I'm just saying
we were trying to figure things out.
Well, battlefield decisions.
That's another point you made last time.
We're not. I get there's a lot of good people that were put on the spot and had to make some fast decisions, and they did the best they could, and but battlefield decisions aren't always right. A good leader can go back, examine, and say, hey, we did this because we thought it was right. It was the best thing. But looking back at it now, we realize, we need to do differently, and we're not going to do that again, type of thing. And so I encourage people to do that on a lot of issues, and I've had to over time. I tell you what, talk about marriages, that's one of the difficult things, Troy, whenever, like, whether or not to do a wedding ceremony for somebody. I got put on the spot about one, and normally I don't think I would have, but it was just kind of this awkward thing. And I was like, and when I say it was last minute, it was kind of a last minute deal. And it was the son of a church member, and they wanted me to do it at their house. And it was like, well, okay, I will. But I had to make a quick decision on it. I regret it to this day. I was wrong. I shouldn't have. I will not do that again. I've made up my mind. I've got a plan in place to keep me from being in that situation again, Troy. It happens. So anyway,
I had a wedding like that one time where the same sort of thing happened. And you talk about, those comic movies, those comedic movies that kind of spin out of control. It's like, this just keeps getting crazier.
Yeah.
So they are denominational, and their preacher was coming from another country, and he couldn't make it. And so literally at the last minute, they asked me if I could step in for him. So I'm a Church of Christ minister, and this couple, they were Pentecostal, but they were getting married in a Mennonite church, and the best man was a Baptist preacher. I mean, we had it all messed up by the time this thing was over. So.
Well, my deal was they were going to get married anyway. This was a favor to, there's no power in me. They were going to get married. But I'll tell you what, why I regret it is the lady later said, well, Guyton wouldn't have married us if he didn't think we were right.
Oh, yeah. That's why you make the decision not to do it again. And
that's why now I have made a determination beforehand, and I will not put myself in that situation again. And what I'm saying is, sometimes in life we don't need to get so busy trying to defend a decision we made. Rather, we need to examine and say, how can I handle this in the future the best way possible? And
that goes back to Sabus's question. He's in a dilemma. He says, with regard to the Bible, what would you answer for this kind of key word right there, brother? Dilemma. It is a dilemma, and it's been a difficult one for us here in the United States. And unfortunately, sadly, it is having repercussions. And
what I'll say to it is that the way you answer it is what we said tonight, is that you're not fulfilling these parts of the command on there. And I want to throw one more thing in there. Have you ever looked up the word virtual?
Well, I mean, I have a basic understanding of it, and essentially what it means is not real, or it's not present. It's
simulated.
Simulated. That's right. It's simulated.
And so it's like you're saying, it's not real. And so why are we going to do that? And then we start getting into this. Well, if we've done that, we've assembled. So if it's live, that makes it okay. What about the delay? What if it was an hour later? Did you assemble?
Well, there's an interesting point about that. There's been congregations that at the beginning try to do it on Zoom, kind of like what we're doing right now. But on Zoom, you can have multiple people at one time. And so they had it was kind of comedic in a way. They had all the members in all their homes, and you can imagine Zoom with all these little boxes everywhere. And the song leader says, "Okay, let's sing number whatever, 482." And he takes off singing, and everybody begins singing. Well, you just mentioned the delay. Next thing you know, they're all over the place. And so they finally figured out, you know what? When the song leader starts singing, we're just going to mute everybody and everybody just sing as it gets to you. So isn't that interesting what you just said? What about the delay? Are we doing that together? So even in the singing, it's not together. Could you imagine that in a live auditorium, everybody singing according to a delay that
Sounds
they
like confusion, like what Paul was dealing with in First
wait a
Corinthians
minute,
14.
1 Corinthians 14,
Yeah.
exactly. So
So great question that you brought on here, Sabus. I hope we gave you some help in answering this. It is something that a lot of people have been studying, examining. And so thank you. I hope it helps. If it doesn't, shoot us back another question about it, and we'll try and hit at it from another angle maybe.